Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
And that's why today I'm very pleased to cast my vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Lyme disease is one of the fastest growing infectious diseases in the country and also one of the most difficult to diagnose. Today we're going to be talking about legislation that's in the New York State Assembly which would help to address this issue. And joining me to discuss this topic is our guest, Assemblyman Santabarbara, who represents Albany, Schenectady, and Montgomery counties. Parts of Albany and Schenectady and all of Montgomery. Yes, all of Montgomery County. So I know that this is something you've been talking about for quite some time, and there's been a lot of attention given to Lyme disease recently. People always seem to be talking about it, especially this time of year. So what's happening in New York State that's made this such an important issue?
Well, what we're seeing is the numbers that are being reported are pretty astonishing. The tick population is growing, and it seems like it doesn't matter. You can be in a wooded area or in the backyard. There's always a risk of tick bites, and sometimes most people don't know they've even been bitten by a tick. But the numbers are very real. Annually across the country, more than 300,000 cases of Lyme disease are reported. That's about 25,000 new cases each month. And just a few years back, New York was one of 14 states that contained 95% of the confirmed cases of Lyme disease. And as I said, sometimes people don't even know they've been bitten by a tick because they're just so small. And it's very hard to even detect. One of the misconceptions out there is that the bullseye that forms once you were bitten by a tick, that doesn't always happen. New information has shown that sometimes that doesn't show at all. So you have to be very diligent about when you go outside, about to check for ticks, especially check animals, check that they go in and out of the house, or check your kids. I know my daughter has long hair, so it's hard to do that, but there are things we can do to prevent, for prevention and just awareness, and to know that there's a risk out there. Lyme disease, when it's not treated, it really is a disease that affects the nervous system, the heart, muscle, joints, a number of other things, and it can last a lifetime. So it's a very devastating disease. So we want to do everything we can here in New York State, especially where there have been a high number of cases of Lyme disease. And just to put out there, it's not just Lyme disease. There are new, we're talking about tick-borne illnesses, and Lyme disease is the one we hear about all the time, but there's actually a number of tick-borne illnesses that have been reported in recent times that are fairly newly discovered, and there probably will be more. So the risk of tick-borne illnesses is very real, especially in our area. You talked about Montgomery County. It's a very rural area. Beautiful area, lots of recreational opportunities, and summertime is here. People are spending more time outside, and we want people to do that. But we also want people to make sure they are aware of the risks and what they can do to protect themselves and their families.
Now, obviously, you've sponsored some legislation to try to address prevention. Can you tell us about some of those bills? One of the things
I worked on last year was to try and establish some funding to look for a vaccine or some sort of protective measures that could be researched, because Lyme disease has just on the rise. Tick population was on the rise. Some sort of preventative measures. So I introduced a bill that would establish a precedent to have New York State participate in a study to do research and development of a vaccine or some other preventative measures. This is something that really needs to be studied much, much further. I feel like there's more information out there that we just don't know, and it just puts our families at risk. So everybody goes outside, and as we talked about, even in the wintertime, sometimes you have a warm day in February and you start hearing about ticks right away and what the illnesses are, or somebody that's been diagnosed, and it's something that's very scary. And if you think about it, the risk, the amount of time you spend outdoors, the risk is just increasing year after year. So something needs to be done, especially in our state where we have. A few years back we had 95% of those cases. That means the risk is very high here. So, Northeast, it just is. So I think that New York State does need to be a part of going forward what we can do to protect New York State residents from tick-borne illnesses. So that was a bill that I worked on last year. I know there's a couple of other bills this year that we're going to touch on, but the awareness is definitely up. So that's good news for everybody. I think this is on everybody's mind at this point.
Yeah, let's talk about the two bills that have actually become law now. One provides people with important information through a number of special warning signs. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the warning signs it's a protective. What we're just talking about. A lot of people are, they go outside. They go to, in Schenectady County, the Plowder-Kill Preserve is a very popular spot. It's a wooded area, lots of trails, lots of nature, waterfall, lots of scenery. And people like to go and spend time there. And there are so many places like that where people just enjoy outdoor activities. What this bill does is it establishes warning signs that can just give you some of those helpful tips: what to do, what to be aware of, what type of clothing to wear, to remember to check for ticks. Sometimes it's a simple thing, a simple reminder. You may just come out of the woods and not even think about it, but we need to start thinking about it. And these warning signs, and I think we had a picture of it up there, just gives you an idea of how small ticks are too, because they are just so tiny that you can easily miss it. So you have to be very diligent, very meticulous when you're checking yourself, and it's good to check yourself before you go in the house if you can. There's a number of other helpful tips on what type of clothing to wear, and other things you can do to protect yourself. And of course, with animals, I have a dog, and you always have to make sure that you're checking your animals because they can bring the ticks inside the house. So there's a number of helpful tips on these signs, so you should look for them. I know we flashed a picture up, so people can look for those at the entrance to state parks and state lands. Before going in, just take a few minutes, look at the tips in there. They're very helpful. They can make all the difference in keeping ticks off of you and making sure, and also to know what to look for if you have been bitten by a tick, what to look for as well. Some people don't know. As I said, sometimes it's not all, the misconception that bullseye is going to form, and so you're okay if you don't see that. That's not true. That information, that's information that has been put out, that's not the only sign. There are a number of other things to look for, so it's very important that we do that.
Now, the second bill, it seems to be a little bit more involved. It establishes a special task force on this issue.
Yes, and that's the task force is going to have. This was actually a very significant piece of legislation, because what this does is it puts a special task force together to examine tick-borne illnesses. Sort of a collaborative effort to get, diagnosis is one of the big issues. It's very difficult to diagnose because some of the symptoms may be symptoms that you just overlook or don't think about. So this is a collaborative effort for better diagnosis, prevention, and treatment. So this is what the idea of what the bill that I introduced last year. This bill puts this task force together. It's a working group, so there's a number of people going to be serving on this task force: Department of Health, Office of Mental Health, Environmental Conservation, and a number of other departments. There's going to be an infectious disease specialist, a practitioner, mental health, health insurance representatives will be there, because a lot of this is health insurance related. With it, make sure that treatments and preventative measures can be covered. So we're going to get some recommendations on what we can do to improve the delivery of care at all levels. It's going to examine the federal government, what's there, the state government, and also the local levels. What can be done? The signage is, a preventative measure, just to make people aware, so that they're thinking about this before they're out on trails or doing some hiking or whatever the case may be. So this is going to be some data collection. Looking at what's been done, what can be done, and reporting back to see what other actions we can take as a state. So this task force is actually a very significant step forward, putting these experts together to examine this issue, and it does need to be examined. Tick population is growing, as I said. The number of cases of Lyme disease is growing. New tick-borne illness is being discovered. So we really need to look at this and figure out what we're going to do long term to protect our communities, to make sure our communities stay healthy. But we also want to make sure we can still enjoy what we have to offer here for recreation, especially in the summertime. As I said, families like to go outside. They like to picnics and spend time hiking and doing a number of things. We want to make sure we can do that and still protect ourselves from this rapidly growing illness.
Now, you also hold a number of events in your district.
Yes, so we just had one in Rotterdam, in my hometown of Rotterdam, at the library. We brought in the Department of Health to talk about Lyme disease, talk about the risks of tick-borne illnesses, and what can be done to protect yourself. I'm going to be holding this year a number of events like this. So I put out a mailer with a brochure, some information. People can look for that in the mail. I'm going to be trying to host events across my district to just inform people of new developments, new things they may not know about, some helpful tips, things that they can do if they're going to be outdoors, what they can do to protect their families, how to look for ticks, how to inspect for ticks, and what to do if you find a tick bite. What are the next steps? What do I do now? Where do I go? So a lot of people, sometimes they don't know this information. What to look for is a big part of this. Preventative measures, and then if you think you've been bitten by a tick, what to do next. So we got together with the Department of Health. We're hosting these sort of a series of Lyme disease prevention informational sessions. So the first one, as I said, was in my hometown of Rotterdam. We're going to be doing it in different communities, so people could look for, they could check on my website, or they can look in the mail for these an invitation of where the next ones will be held.
And when can they find more information on Lyme disease and prevention, other than going to your events?
Well, the best thing, if you can come to the event, it's great. If you can't, the brochure that I talked about, a lot of helpful tips. I put one out every year. That's on my website, www.nyassembly.gov. They can find that downloadable brochure as we're speaking here. They can look that up under Assemblyman Santabarbara, my webpage. They can pull down that brochure and print it and have that and just take a quick look at it. They can also, again, make sure that they've on the signs are websites and things. If you're going to enter a park, there's information you can look up. A lot of people always have their smartphones with them. They can always pull up the website off of the Department of Health website off the sign, or the Department of Health website in general. If you can find that, if you want to pull that up on your search, there's a lot of information on Lyme disease there as well. This is something that the more information, the better. The more people are aware of the risks and what they can do, the better. So that brochure is on my website. People can download that. And as always, they can always call my office. We can get them out a packet of information. Any questions, they can call me. Or we can, if we don't have the answer, we can direct them to the Department of Health.
A lot of good, useful information, especially, like you said, people out and about during the summer. And, of course, many other issues come up that constituents have questions about. And how can they reach you?
Yes, I have. I always mention I have a Times Union blog that I do. I try and keep that updated. That's on the Times Union website. Also a link to my website. I also do a weekly podcast that they can find on iTunes for the time being. I think they're switching that over to something else, but they can find a link to that on my website as well. And I have a newsletter that people can sign up for, where we talk about issues like this, and people can stay up to date on legislation like this, what's happening with the task force. So when the recommendations are made, what new legislation will come out of this. And if people have comments or things that they want to talk about, they can always reach me through my website, or just, as I said, just give a call. If they don't find it on my website, if something they're looking for in particular, if they want to know when the next event is, or would like to get on a list to be invited to that next event, there'll be a few of them. They can always call me and request to be put on the list as well. It's a very serious, Lyme disease is one of the very serious issues that we're working on, but there's a number of other issues that people may be interested in, and I encourage them to contact my office at any time, visit my website, or give us a call.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, it's great to be on the show. Thanks for having me to talk about this important issue.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Assemblyman Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, parts of Albany, Schenectady, and all of Montgomery County. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.